Bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Well, here we go. Another week, another fresh start to Fade to Black. Today is Monday, October 7th, 2024. And let's get to it's going to be a great week. It's going to be a great week and help support everything that we do around here. You know what to do. Get yourself a Fade to Black t-shirt. There's two shirts, two ways to get them. Game Changer membership below, or just order a shirt. Everything's autographed. Everything includes shipping. The links are below. Help support the show. All right. Here we go. Kicking off another week here on Fade to Black, but not just any week, because this week is my birthday week, as if you didn't know that. Tonight, Monday, Doug Grunther is with us, and we're going to be talking about, okay, it's like all of my favorite subjects. So we're going to get into physics, we're going to get into philosophy, we're going to get into consciousness, the evolution of this planet and where we are, and of course, the crazy technical advances we have made in the last 100, maybe 300 years. I'm going to go 100. Let's probably water that down to 25 years. We're going to do all of that tonight with Doug. Tomorrow night, Hans Dietrich is with us. Finally, I've got Hans on the show, and we're going to talk about all of his deep, ancient history that he has researched around the world. We're going to do that tomorrow night with the magic of symbols. Wednesday night, Dr. Diane Hennessy is with us, neuroscientist. Again, one of my favorite subjects, the brain. And I've called the show Neuroscience and You. Yeah, that's Wednesday night. Really looking forward to that. And then Thursday, well, Thursday's my birthday. So we're going to do a very special show here, an AMA, AJA. I'm going to hang out with all of you. And who knows? Maybe we'll do some bong rips and vodka shots. No, I would never do that on the air. Right? No, I wouldn't. Man, I haven't done that in years. It's been so long. Could you imagine? I struggle with doing a live show every single night, sometimes 2 shows, sometimes 3. And could you imagine? I haven't smoked pot this is 2024. I'm going 24 years, 23 years. Could you imagine the depths of darkness I would go into? Yeah, man. Anyway, it's my birthday on Thursday, so we're all going to hang out. I'm going to celebrate with you, and I might have a special guest or two stop by to say hello. So that is Thursday night. I have 3 major events coming up. Next month, I'll be in Peru and Bolivia with Brian Forrester. That's November 15th through the 27th. It is sold out, but if you want to get on the waiting list, the links are below. And Brian has tours going on all year long, and you can sign up for any of his other tours as well. The links are below. And then coming up, well, I was going to say coming up in February. It's actually next year, February, the Conscious Life Expo, the largest conference in the world. I have been hosting this conference for 10 years, 9 years, 10 years, doing it again this year. This may be the biggest and best yet, which says a lot when we're talking about the biggest conference in the world. That is February 7th through the 10th, 2025 at the Hilton Hotel at the LAX airport. The links for all of the speakers and info and tickets and everything, the links are below. And then coming up after that, the Rise of the Guardians. That is going down March 29th and 30th, 2025. In Sedona, Arizona. Now, I've got, like I said, I've got 2 or 3 other events we're working into the schedule. I will keep everybody updated on all of that. All right. Where am I? Well, I had an amazing weekend. It was really hot, but I had an amazing weekend. It was nothing but work. So much so that I only rode my bike on one day. I didn't ride it today. I'm just buried with things that I have to get done, and not only with the conferences and travel, but there's other things and taping and oh, geez, I've got to get everything done. But I had an amazing weekend where I was able to just focus on getting stuff done. I'm a big time procrastinator. If I can figure out an excuse, you know what? Just do it tomorrow. I'll do it. And then some mornings, I wake up and I go, okay, this. Get all of that done, then you can have some fun. And I set those rules for me. And that's what I did Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I just feel so much better. And I carry less guilt. All right, I carry less guilt. Tonight, Doug Gunther is with us. And now here's the deal. Let me, before I bring Doug on, tonight we're going to be talking about shifts in consciousness and what they actually mean. So we're going to get into that. But the other part with Doug, and I'm going to start the interview off with a question: how do you go from philosophy and consciousness into the hard sciences? Isn't that supposed to be a line in the sand that philosophers aren't supposed to cross?
Well, a lot of philosophers and scientists would still agree with you, but a growing minority know better. And the gentleman who deserves the real credit here is Fritjof Capra, a renowned physicist who took a big risk with his career back in the mid-1970s by publishing a book called The Tao of Physics. I read it in the mid-80s and it literally flipped me out, because here was a scientist who had a mystical experience right before he was about to give us a lecture. And at the beginning of his book, he details the mystical experience he had. And then he had a chance to interview Werner Heisenberg, who was one of the founders of quantum theory, who confirmed that he and a number of his colleagues who discovered the most successful scientific theory of all time were all interested in Asian spiritual mystic insights. Now, could that be a coincidence? Werner Heisenberg, when he was trying to come up with the uncertainty principle for which he would get the Nobel Prize, went to a deserted island for 5 days just to meditate. Erwin Schrödinger, who wrote the most successful quantum formula, was deep into Hindu philosophy. And what the book, The Tao of Physics, showed is that it's not a coincidence that the strangeness and mystery that are implicated in what they discovered at the quantum level of existence mirrors in many ways what ancient spiritual mystics and philosophers were saying thousands of years ago. So this line that is drawn between science, philosophy, spirituality, it's not that there aren't some boundaries, but they're a lot more fluid than we thought. And I'm not a scientist. In fact, I was pretty bad at math, and I wasn't particularly good at science throughout school. But when I read the book, The Tao of Physics, it was captivating, because what they discovered at the quantum realm was so fascinating that when they would meet at conferences, they would spend it. When I'm saying they, I'm talking about Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli, Erwin Schrödinger. These Nobel Prize-winning scientific minds would spend a lot of the time talking about the philosophical and more spiritual and psychological aspects of what they were discovering. Now, what we're really talking about here, Jimmy, is it can be really well delineated by discussing the left and right hemisphere of the brain, which is a big part of my book, and helps explain why some people need these rigid divisions in order to feel comfortable. But those who are more right hemisphere oriented understand that to understand the universe, you have to take it all in intuitively and use imagination, and that science is not just formulas and mathematics. So I'm very careful in my book. Whenever I state something scientific about quantum theory, I quote a quantum scientist and I
Smart.
footnote it because I'm not a scientist. But
Right.
it is very clear that at least a half a dozen of the major developers of quantum theory, the most successful scientific theory of all time, and the reason you and I are speaking over the World Wide Web right now, has amazing, mysterious, interesting, fascinating implications that we're still wrestling with today.
The idea of how far we have come in understanding the cosmos in the last 25 years has tipped over everything that was seemed solid in cosmology, right, and astrophysics for the previous 75 years. And now we are at a point today where we clearly don't understand anything, and we have about the cosmos, and we have the ability to peer so deep. And what is going on at the same time with that is what is consciousness, and the study of that, and how the brain works. That is something that is another huge mystery to us. And as each day goes by, we're finding out that we don't know anything, do we?
Well, actually, we know a fair amount, but what we need to understand is the limits of knowledge and where one has to take a leap from the certainty of knowledge to the more imaginative, ambiguous, and therefore more creative, unconscious, and wisdom. In other words, Einstein, whom Time magazine named the person of the century. I don't think you get a lot of arguments that he was the most influential scientist of the 20th century. He has said, and it's been authenticated, imagination is more important than knowledge. This is the greatest scientist of the 20th century. And he was, and we'll explain as we go along, a right hemisphere thinker who, rather than hang out in physical laboratories where all of his colleagues were trying to figure out what's going on with light and quantum, they had their Bunsen burners, they had their test tubes, they were in elite universities. But it was Albert Einstein working in a patent office because he couldn't get a job in academia. He was too much of a rebel. His laboratory was the right hemisphere of his brain, the imaginative part of his brain. And he credits two things that were very important in making the leap from knowledge to wisdom. One was a thought experiment he did while sitting at the patent office, and I'll explain what the thought experiment was. And this quote has been authenticated, he said, "My entire career is based on a dream I had when I was 11 years old." This is a great scientist talking, who said without his imagination, without this incredible dream that rocked his boat when he was 11 years old and he couldn't forget, he would not have been the first person to discover relativity. And by the way, not well known. He did not receive his Nobel Prize for the theory of relativity. He received his Nobel Prize for writing the first paper on the quantum theory of light. And the reason he was able to be first is because he was much more in the laboratory of his mind, doing thought experiments and reflecting on dreams. And I think that's a pretty bold statement for those who think, you know what, all we need to know about quantum theory is that it produces great technology. Well, technology is not enough. And if you don't believe that, take a look at what's going on with climate change and global warming and people flipping out over AI. We know a lot, Jimmy, but knowledge only can take us so far. And then it's a leap into the area of wisdom and imagination. And that's really what I detail in my book. And there's so many of the greatest visionary thinkers of the 20th century came out of science and psychology.
Well, that's exactly my point. in that we don't know anything, that we know we have consciousness. We know this. We know that we can laugh, taste, smile, think, ponder, dream. We know, and for so long, the hard sciences were convinced that consciousness was chemistry. It's a reaction. It's physical. We don't know how it arises, but it is just part of particles. And as we move along, that is getting flipped on its head. That consciousness very well may be non-physical and exist outside of the body first. And that would certainly just rewrite science and philosophy and physics and hard sciences, and of course, the nature of consciousness itself. And that this is going to be fresh learning. It's like we're going to have to erase the whiteboard, don't you think, and start over?
Well, I'll tell you the take I take in my book, and I both smile and get frustrated at how few psychologists and philosophers, even though virtually all psychologists, Jimmy, would agree that some 95 to 99% of what we see, act on, and believe comes from the unconscious part of our minds. That's pretty much agreed on. And yet, if any of your listeners or viewers go to a bookstore, and there are always new books coming out on consciousness because it's a hot subject, because we know it's important and it's so mysterious. And I challenge, go into the index of these brilliant people writing books on consciousness, and the unconscious is barely mentioned.
Right. Yes.
So here's my analogy.
Yes.
Here's my analogy. And then we'll get into why people are scared of the unconscious and why they need to know it's where all the creative action is. Okay. Here's a thought experiment. Let's assume you and I were given $1 million and we were charged with really needing to understand how the ocean currents are working, right? And let's say we just sat on a beach and watched the waves coming to shore and went back to the people who gave us the money and said, here's our information about how the ocean is. We can tell you a lot about the sizes of the waves as they came to shore and how the tide changed. Wouldn't the people who gave us the money say, wait a minute, you're just looking at the surface. What about the currents that are underneath? Oh, well, that would be too difficult. We'd have to get bathyspheres and we'd have to go under. No, it's like thinking you can understand an iceberg by seeing only the part that's above the water. Well, there's no different than saying, I want to understand consciousness, but I'm not going to deal with the unconscious, even though psychologists agree that the unconscious is the much larger and more influential partner of our consciousness. So in my view, and what I detail in my book, is that to understand consciousness, we have to be willing to descend into the creative, dark, mysterious, but gift-giving center of our psyche, which is the unconscious. And that's what Carl Jung did. That's what, in many ways, these quantum physicists did. A lot of them were deeply into meditation. And so I'm fascinated by the unconscious because it's one of our greatest tools. And most people are just scared to go down there because it's a little too ambiguous and a little too mysterious. But and we can talk about it, when you're willing to just write down your dreams and reflect on them, play them back like a movie, when you're willing to do thought experiments, creative visualizations, when you're willing to let your imagination run wild, that's where the deep insights come from, both in our personal lives and what we're going to need to do culturally and as a species if we're going to thrive in the anxiety-ridden, global warming, digital age we now live in. I think we're being called upon, I would say by nature's intelligence, to start to get in touch with the deeper parts of our psyches, which are available to us, but we've been ignoring for too long.
Why do you think the big thinkers are scared?
Okay.
And the reason why I ask that, you bring up Einstein, and I have brought up this aspect of Einstein, even Newton. We can go back to Isaac Newton, actually. But staying with Einstein, the ideas that he had running around inside of his head were at a point in time, technically in history, that he didn't have any way to see this, any way to understand it, or anything else. He went outside of the box, thought about it, and then came back and applied it. And we don't have that today. It's everybody wants to stay in their lane, and you know, it's a funding environment. I get that too as well. But they just want to say they don't understand anymore that the big leaps that we made were from thinkers that thought outside of the box and then went out and solved it. And that's what Einstein did. And to think about bending light around a celestial body, you know, inside of your head, the speed of light and mass, right? That wait a minute here. But that happened inside of his head, and then he went back and did the math.
So just one thing, while still it's a small minority of people today who are willing to deal with the more visionary part of our psyche, they are out there. Bernard Kastrup, Rupert Sheldrake, Ian McGilchrist, Fritjof Capra. These are people who've been successful out there with books and talks and YouTube interviews, and they are right on target with the more imaginative understanding that we need to dissolve some of these firm boundaries between science, philosophy, spirituality, and mysticism. So it is happening. But if I may, I always like to give examples. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I had two great dream teachers. And Jeremy Taylor, who's a co-founder of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, I did 40 weekend workshops with him. I did 50 radio shows with him where we took callers who gave us their dreams and we worked their dreams on the radio. Great guy, passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. And this was his favorite example of how often the most frightening, dark nightmare has the most information for us. And here's a really good example that's been authenticated. Okay, so we're in the mid-19th century, and we're at the precipice of the Industrial Revolution. And many of the greatest engineers in Britain were working on trying to create the first efficient sewing machine. Okay, and they were all frustrated they just couldn't get it to work. And one of those was an engineer named Elias Howe, Howe. And he's working in his home laboratory and he's frustrated like his colleagues, and he falls asleep and he has the following horrific nightmare. Okay, ready? Fasten your seatbelts. He's being chased by cannibals in a jungle. They capture him. They tie his hands tightly behind his back and lead him back to the village. They put him in a big pot and they light a fire of water, and they light a fire under it. And the water is heating up and starting to boil. And Elias is freaking out. And he notices that as the water gets hotter, it's loosening the bonds holding his hands, and he's able to free his hands. So he takes a hand and he grabs the side of the pot to pull himself out. And one of the natives takes his spear, shoves it in his chest, and puts it back in the pot. He frees the other hand. He grabs the other side of the pot. Another native takes the spear, puts it in his chest, pushes him back in the pot, and he wakes up. He wakes up in a cold sweat. His nightdress is soaked. Well, he's thrilled to realize it was only a dream, but something stuck in his mind.
Literally.
And suddenly, he noticed. He said, "Wait a minute. Those spears that were pushing me back in the boiling water had holes near the points of the spear." And the phrase kept coming back, holes in the points, holes in the point. Okay. Now, I'm not a sewer, but when you hand sew, you thread through a hole near the base of the needle in order to give the human hand leverage. And so the engineer is being rational and logic, and we all know rationality and logic rules the world, right? They assumed with certainty that their machine, the sewing machine, would have to thread through a hole near the base. But in the dream, the cannibals had spears and they had holes in the points. So Elias Howe says, what the heck? he goes into his laboratory and he refigures the gear system so that the machine would thread through a hole near the point, and he developed the first efficient sewing machine, which kick-started the entire Industrial Revolution. So it's not unfair or an exaggeration, Jimmy, to say that the clothes you're wearing and I'm wearing, and unless you have a lot of your listeners and viewers who are naked right now, their clothes, all of our clothes, we owe a debt of gratitude to those cannibals who chased Elias Howe in his nightmare.
No question about it. No question about it. And he would probably, this is something that I laugh at a lot, that he would probably be okay with not only dreams, but synchronicities or deja vus or another dimension, a parallel world, life after death. He probably would have an open mind to that. Today, that is one of the big issues that we have, is that the big physics, the big scientists, the big scientific names out there don't believe, aren't spiritual. Most of them aren't spiritual, don't think anything about synchronicities, don't think anything about coincidences or the dream state. They don't consider any of that, but yet all of that happens to them, and they'll just say, it's just probability. You know,
Yeah, it's a coincidence.
It's a coincidence, right?
But you know, it's and I have examples in my book of showing that there is a growing minority of philosophers, scientists, psychologists who are tuning into this. It's about shifting from the left to the right hemisphere of the brain, which we'll get into. I'm not saying it's a majority yet, but it doesn't take a majority to create a paradigm shift. It takes a fervent minority, and it is a growing trend, and programs like this help to induce that. So you brought up the term synchronicity, okay? And we could, a synchronicity, the technical definition of a synchronicity, two or more events which clearly didn't cause each other, but they're too meaningfully connected to be a coincidence. And the term synchronicity was coined by the greatest psychologist of the 20th century, Carl Jung, who's a big part of my book. And the experience that Jung had, which not only got him inspired to create a term for it, synchronicity, but something he focused on very closely for the rest of his life. The incident that inspired it has been authenticated. It was in his autobiography, and it's just, in some ways, even more bizarre than the Elias Howe story. Okay, you ready? So, Jung was in the 1920s, had a reputation of being one of the most brilliant psychologists, psychoanalysts in Europe, and he had a thriving practice. But he had one client, an aristocratic woman, where he was getting nowhere. She came, religiously every week for her therapy sessions, but she had a real resistance to opening up. And despite all of his gifts as a psychologist, Jung could not make any progress. And so he decided the only fair thing to do is when she came to her next appointment was to tell her, look, we tried, it's not working, there's no reason for you to come back. She comes in for her so-called final session, and she has a dream. And in the dream, she's in ancient Egypt, and someone gifts her this amazing jewel with the image of a scarab beetle, which was a religious icon of the ancient Egyptians. And as she's relating this dream, Jung hears a noise tapping against the window of his office. And he goes over to the window, and there's an insect banging against it. He opens his window, and he's able to grab it. And it was a beetle that most resembles a scarab beetle in Europe. And he brings it over to the woman, opens his hand and says, Madam, here's your scarab beetle. It so freaked her out, she loosened her resistance, and they did excellent therapy after that. So was it a coincidence that that insect that looks like a scarab beetle happened to be tapping against his window while she was recounting a dream about a scarab beetle in what was going to be their last session? I don't think so. Jung didn't think
What?
so.
So what if he didn't notice it? Did it happen? Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the and I almost said atheist, the atheist scientists come into play. Right. Well, that's just determinism. It was going to happen anyway. It was just, yeah. There's no free will here. There's no synchronicity. This was an event that was supposed to happen, and it's just math. I have big issues with that, but can you imagine living in that 2D, 3D world where you absolutely don't ponder or wonder or dream?
Well, since you like kind of put a pin into the balloon of the rationalists who say the only thing counts is what's certain and what can be proved mathematically and scientifically, here's a nice little needle for you to puncture the next balloon with. And this is authenticated. The scientist who is considered the greatest champion of cause and effect, the mechanistic model of the universe, right? The universe consists of objects and parts, and they run by 4 universal laws that Newton discovered. And they were brilliant discoveries, and we have a lot to thank for it. Because of Newton and because of cause and effect science and technology, we have a lot of the modern comforts that we have today. But Isaac Newton is considered by the rational scientists the champion of the mechanistic universe. Well, guess what? Isaac Newton wrote more about spiritual alchemy than he did hard science.
It's a fact. It's a fact. He was an alchemist. Really, mathematics, we all know about that. A deep religious man and religious scholar. And all of those and philosopher, right? Mm-hmm. And all of these aspects about him allowed his mind to expand, and that was 300 years ago. And
it's so interesting because the reason we don't know it was buried for so long is his family was afraid if that got out, it would ruin his reputation. So they buried that. But you know what? The same thing happened with Carl Jung. Carl Jung was so open to mysticism as a psychologist, and yet his family kept secret what's called the Red Book, which is where he almost went insane because he wanted to go so deeply into his unconscious. You can exaggerate anything, but it was finally released, and it's fascinating. So we all think we have to protect people who, are into mystical intuition and imagination. That's where all the action is. Listen, we need our hard science. We need our technology. But the fact that we've been so married and obsessed with getting more technology by thinking that we're apart from nature and we're just going to keep taking from her, right? And in our wisdom, we refer to nature as Mother Nature, okay? Because we were born out of nature's intelligence. And Mother's Nature gave us 2 hemispheres in the frontal cortex of our brain. And the smaller one, the smaller half, is the one that is wired for technology and certainty and following the dots and logical sequential rationality. Okay. The larger hemisphere of our brain is wired for imagination, creative shifts, intuitive leaps, and empathy. The right hemisphere enjoys sharing. The left hemisphere feels it needs to control. And obviously, Western cultures and now the planetary culture is much too heavily weighted towards the left hemisphere, which is why a brilliant psychiatrist, philosopher, neurologist, Ian McGilchrist, wrote a book about the divided brain and the making of the Western world, where he's calling for what we're talking about, a shift to the right hemisphere. Because if we're going to not only survive but thrive in the 21st century, dealing with the escalation of global warming, and if you don't think that's happening, talk to the millions of people in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina who just got hammered by a hurricane that was supposed to be a force 1, and at the almost last minute, it became a force 4. So
and 10 days, and 10 days later, they've got another one. Crazy. Right. Yeah, that's absolutely.
if we're going to,
let's stay right here for a second.
Sure.
When we look at, and we can span almost 2,000 years here, 1,500 years. When we go back to the big philosophers of our time, Socrates, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Nietzsche, anyone, just pull, they all have a different take on who we are and what we are and how we got here and how to fix things. And I think that it has complicated the addressing of consciousness and who we are, because they made things so complex. Is that an overstatement? And I'm not trying to be a reductionist either. I don't want to sound that way.
No, it's a fascinating area. You bring up a terrific area, and philosophy was, what I studied in college. I like to go to the root meaning of things, because otherwise you get lost in the weeds. So what does philosophy mean? Words are important. Philosophy comes from the Greek for love of wisdom. Now, wisdom is very different from knowledge. We tend to conflate the two. They're very different. The left hemisphere of our brain is much more tuned into knowledge, where we can say, okay, I need to be certain about this, and here's what we know. And you know what? When I drive over a bridge that takes me across the river near where I live, the Hudson River, I'm glad the engineer was a left hemisphere rational person, okay? Because I want to make sure the nuts and bolts are pretty solid when I drive over there. But we take that fact, and then we think we can take quantum physics and know it. No, we can't, because its implications are beyond knowledge. Philosophy is about the search, the love of wisdom. The love of wisdom. Wisdom is not certain. Wisdom is complex. We make it more. But see, there's a difference between complexity and complication. I would agree with you. The reason I didn't continue with my philosophical studies is because the more I got into philosophy, the more complicated it was getting.
Yep.
And I had to I had to learn about these narrow metaphysical issues that nobody outside of a philosophy class would ever be interested in
or care. That's right. That's right. That's right. And I'll say this, and I hope that you laugh. I've got a big stack of philosophy books, and every single one, I go, okay, this one's going to give me the magic. Everybody's talking about it. This is it. This is going to open up my mind. I get like 100 pages in, right? And I close the book and go, it's somebody working out their daddy issues and trying to push that on me. And you know what I mean? And I just put it down. And it's like over and over. You can go back to Socrates with these issues like this. And getting very, very, very complex with their own personal life. And I don't think it applies to the individuals out there like that. No, they're making it too complex. And I think, I'm going to say one more thing. I'm just going to piss everybody off. They want it more complex. So you keep coming back to the well, right? You keep coming back.
There's something to say for that. That's how you get tenure. That's how you but the good news is that some of those philosophers are able to break through the shell. You mentioned Nietzsche. The reason he was one of my favorites is not because I think he's right, but he was so interesting. He writes well. Look, Immanuel Kant was a brilliant philosopher. I challenge any of your viewers to try to read through one of his books. I challenge you. You can't do it.
Can't do it.
It doesn't mean he wasn't brilliant, but you're right. Philosophy got hijacked by academia. You know what philosophy was invented for? You go back to Socrates, right? Socrates was the ideal philosopher, not because he was smarter than anybody. His famous quote is, "I know nothing," which is what you were saying about us, right?
Right.
Right. If you admit you know nothing, what does that mean? You're open-minded to start to learn rather than repeat. Okay. Socrates, what was his strategy for philosophy? He was a street philosopher. He would hang out in the streets and get people involved in conversations, and he would ask questions. He wasn't sitting there pontificating. Here is my take on the universe. He was inquisitive. Okay, and this gets me to another key that I enjoyed making in my book: the word education. Okay, it has a specific root meaning that we have totally forgotten. The word education comes from the Latin educare. It means to draw out, not stuff in. So if we take the love of wisdom, which is philosophy, and the root word of education, which is draw out, what we need to be doing, and through the World Wide Web, there are more people able to do it, we need to draw each other's wisdom out by having conversations, not debates. By collaborating our ideas and integrating our ideas, not competing for one idea being better than another. And I can give some really good examples, as I do in my book, of where collaborative thinking has changed people's lives in ways that weren't predictable. So I'm agreeing with you that philosophy got hijacked by academia. It got hijacked by the rationalists. But there have been brilliant philosophers and brilliant educators. You just have to spend a little more time trying to find them. And but well, we can talk about 2001, which 2001, the movie was philosophy on the screen. And by the way, they were very influenced by Nietzsche.
Here, yes. It's funny when he said, try to complete an Immanuel Kant book. I would challenge that and say, complete a paragraph.
Yeah.
No, I'm being serious, man. I've done that so many times where I've read a page like 10 times of going back. Okay, wait, what? Nietzsche's not innocent in this either, by the way. Great writer, but complex. It's multi-layered. And so, but let's stay right here if we can. The ideas of the deep philosophical thinkers and applying that and moving over to physics. I think that we need, when you listen to a theoretical physicist today and ask if it doesn't matter, listen to any of them, what they are missing in their search of the perfect algorithm and the completion of math, what they are missing are the lessons of life and wisdom. That's not driving them. And I'm not saying it should drive them, but they should understand it and let that help them move forward in their careers. And that's the problem. Today they are taught philosophy, no. Hard sciences, good. Chemistry, good, right? Math, good. Philosophy stays off the table. Consciousness, there is a line in the sand. We're not going there.
Well, here's why I remain optimistic, which isn't always easy. I'll tell a story about my grandfather who taught me optimism. But to me, one brilliant scientist who gets what you're talking about, who's got wisdom, not just knowledge, right? Who understands that to be a great scientist, one has to be at least open to philosophy and spirituality. Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was a brilliant cosmologist astronomer, okay? And yet, if you Google him and listen to some of his talks, he is a wise person. Fritjof Capra, I mentioned before, is still teaching, is a brilliant physicist who's totally drunk on Eastern spiritual wisdom. And for me, every time I find one like this, and my book has a number of them, to me it makes up for all the other ones who remain blind and in their little cubby holes of what they think is important.
can I say this? And I don't say this to offend. You know what helped Carl Sagan? And by the way, he flip-flopped a lot. And that's good. That's good. That means he's learning. But he did the puff. He was the pothead. And that expanded, that allowed him to just think outside of the box and get outside of chemistry and get outside of the math and jump into the what if. And there, I said it, and I'm just we need more weed in the world of physics.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you. However, along with that, not instead of that, is the shift to the right hemisphere of the brain.
Sure.
So, and that's something we can all do. We all do it. We just don't recognize it. And but the kind of people that you're celebrating and that I write about made that shift to the right hemisphere. We talked about Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge, and his laboratory was his imagination. Okay. I'll give let's see, another example. Okay, here's an example that blew my mind. Okay, I'm getting interested in dreams, and it's early. It's 2002, so the web's now 10 years old. But I was searching around, and I find a website of a dream expert by the name of Dr. Montague Ullman. He had one of the coolest academic titles I've ever heard of. Ready? He was Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Parapsychology at Albert Einstein Medical College. Okay? He had a laboratory where they studied ESP. He was a dream expert, and he was a medical psychiatrist. And according to his website, he lived about an hour and a half from me. He was 92 years old, still living alone, and once a year, 14 people he would take into his house for a 2-weekend workshop in his method of group dream work. So I called him up and I said, I would love to take it. He says, well, what's your background? I said, well, I'm a radio talk show host, but I'm really interested in dreams. He said, well, that's interesting. He said, we're filled up right now, but I'll let you know if we get a cancellation. They did. And the next thing I know, I'm driving down to be with 12 other, therapists and psychologists of note, and one classical pianist who was studying at Juilliard who wanted to know more about dreams. And he shows us his method of how to do group dream work. And I'm not making this story up. So now it's time for us to practice one. And so he asks for a volunteer to present a dream to the group. Okay. And a woman raises her hand. And I'm assuming if she volunteered to give a dream to the group, it's going to be like an Elias Howe crazy dream, right? Here's her dream. I'm sitting under a tree. Some of the leaves have fallen to the ground. There's a stream nearby. It's the end of her dream. I'm going, what kind of dream? What the heck can we do with that? So now in Monty's method, we're sitting in a circle, right? She now pulls her chair back so she's not part of the circle. And the rest of us now project on her dream, meaning, this is an important distinction. We don't say, this is what I think her dream means. We say, if this were my dream, this is what it would mean to me. That's an important flip, okay? We're not saying, oh, I can tell you what your dream means, like I'm all knowledgeable.
You can't do it. No, you can't do that. You can't do that.
What we're saying is, if I had this dream, here's what it would mean to me. And now we're going around and we're sharing our projections on this ridiculously simple dream, right? So one person, I remember the projection. One person said, well, in my dream, that tree is the tree in Eden. And as a dreamer, I'm Eve about to, eat the apple. Another person said, I think of it as the family tree. I think this dream has something to do with my family. Another person says, well, there's a stream by, streams flow. And so if this were my dream, something I'm stuck on the dream is telling me I can flow through it. And I said, well, in my experience with dreams, they always like to make jokes and pun. They do. And I said, if this were my dream, the leaves falling, it's telling me it's time for me to leave something, that's been part of my life. So now the dreamer comes back in the circle, and it's her turn to either ask questions of us or comment on our projections. And here's what she said, Jimmy. Thank you all. You've just helped me make a life-changing decision. And I'm going, what? And she relates to us that for a year, she'd been wanting to quit her job as a high-paying executive in a corporation because she found it was just destroying her soul. She always wanted to be an art therapist, but she was brought up in a very assertive family that felt you needed to be a success in life. You had to make a lot of money and go into corporate or financial fields. And she, even in her early 30s, she was feeling pressure from her siblings and her parents that it would be too risky to give up this high-paying job and suddenly go into art therapy. But when she heard the projections, oh, this is about the family tree. Oh, this is about something flowing. Oh, now I can leave the leaves. I can leave something. She said, I'm going to do it. So here, I bring up this story not because I expect all of your listeners and viewers to suddenly start dream groups, although it's not a bad idea, but because it shows that when we shift to the right hemisphere of our brains, which dreams take us to, and collaborate rather than compete, we can make breakthroughs for others and ourselves that are almost too incredible to believe. But I sat there and watched this happen. And here's the kicker. When you do this kind of a work, those of us who work the dream discovered something about our lives in her dream.
Right. Yeah, dreams are just completely individual. They mean nothing to anybody else unless you apply it like you guys did. That makes I like that. Now for her, he should have read my book on philosophy. Yeah, have you read it? It's one page. Yeah, it's one page.
Tell me about it.
This is it. Find your bliss, be happy. That's it. That's my book on philosophy. Yeah.
Can't beat that.
Yeah, New York Times bestseller. One page. And but I totally get that. And so many out there, and I just think about how frustrating it must be and closed down for those that are frustrated, locked down on a treadmill, and they have that secret, that bliss, that the only thing that'll make them happy is to go and do that. Otherwise, they're going to lead and live this tormented life. And I don't want to get to the end of the road, man, and go, I should have done that. No, don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed by it. Whatever it is. Maybe it's, maybe you want to make boots or shoes. Well, get out of the insurance sales that you're doing and go and make those boots. And that's the only way you're going to get that release and be happy, right?
Yeah, it takes guts because you have to go against cultural norms and family norms. But that's the difference between the left hemisphere, which can only operate when it's dealing with something it feels it can get a certain answer to. The real crux of life is in the right hemisphere, where we let our imaginations run wild, where we tune into code. I'm not saying I know what the soul is. All I know is it's something that can be tapped into. It's a deep reservoir of meaning that's available to us. And it can be through dream work. It can be through meditation, contemplation, finding your bliss by just going to a bookstore and browsing and see what book seems to speak to you. My life has been changed 3 different times because of a book that just seemed to be calling me when I was browsing through a bookstore. The trick is, and it's hard when anxiety takes over the brain. We see that in our political culture, in our culture in general. When anxiety kicks in, we're going to go to the left hemisphere of the brain, which is going to look for certainty and logic and a very narrow focus. And we need to open up to the beauty of, you see, the right hemisphere, we know now through neurology, okay, through MRI machines, EEG machines. We know this, that when we're dreaming, when we have an intuitive flash, when we have an imaginative breakthrough, when a synchronicity happens, you can trace the neurons going from the unconscious up into the right hemisphere of the brain, which takes it in and accepts it and plays with it, hands it over to the left hemisphere, which analyzes it. That's fine. But the left hemisphere won't give it back because it doesn't know how to share. This is all neurologically provable. It's our job to know when we're being selfish and scared and shift to that right hemisphere where we do find our bliss, where we do have answers that can't be answered any other way. And in my book, I give many examples from people well known and not well known.
There is, I started off talking about this tonight, so let's circle back. Right now, the understanding of the cosmos and the universe, which for so long seemed pretty solid. We didn't understand a few things, but things were just accepted and we just moved along. Now, today, 95% of the universe, 95%, is made up of two things: dark energy and dark matter, both of which we can't see, both of which we know absolutely nothing about. So therefore, 95% of what's out there we know nothing about. Nothing at all. And to think that dark energy makes up for 67 to 70% of the dark energy, and I'm leaning on consciousness. It's like we're going to take this a step further. We're going to find out what is out there in the universe and what is the power of everything. And I think that the next step in evolution is consciousness, and we're going to find out that that is the large chunk of the universe.
Well, here's an interesting synchronicity. Based on my research, it's actually 95 to 99% of the universe is dark energy and dark matter, somewhere in that range, right? Well, how's this for I call it a synchronicity, so others would call it a coincidence. That same exact ratio, 95 to 99%, is of our thinking, our actions, and our beliefs come from the unconscious. So isn't it interesting, Jimmy, that the 95 to 90% of our psyche is the unconscious, and 95 to 99% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy? Okay. Now,
just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence.
That's determinism.
Okay. Now,
you're supposed to laugh, Doug. That was funny. That was real funny. That was some philosophy zingers right there. That was good.
And we need more of those. So zing away.
We
do. The more we are able to tap into our unconscious, which we are perfectly capable of doing, right? I propose in my book, the more we tap into what's going on in the universe, because it's interesting how you phrased it, Jimmy, and I appreciate it, that up until the modern age, we thought we knew everything about how the universe worked. It was Newtonian mechanics, right? And Newton was brilliant, and we have four main, cause and effect, and the four laws of motion, and the universe is a mechanism, and we can take it apart just like a watch and figure out how the parts come together. But my book starts in the year 1900, the first year of the modern age, and during that year, two people who didn't know each other discovered two amazing things which didn't seem connected. In the year 1900, Sigmund Freud publishes The Interpretation of Dreams, which would go on to be one of the most influential books of the 20th century. And in that same year, Max Planck unintentionally discovered the quantum. So Freud inspired thinkers to realize, wait a minute, we've got to get into the creative darkness center of our psyches to understand more of who we are. And Planck's discovery of the quantum inspired a lot of brilliant visionaries to go into the deep creative center of the subatomic quantum world. And I set those up in my book as two parallel paths. And Carl Jung, the most influential psychologist of the 20th century, and Wolfgang Pauli, who Einstein nominated for a Nobel Prize for quantum theory. That's how smart this guy was. Those two, Jung from the psychological point of view and Pauli from the quantum point of view, worked together for 20 years, convinced that there was a gateway or a doorway between the dark creative unconscious mind and the dark creative heart of the quantum realm. They were convinced that it was there. They couldn't discover it, but when two people that bright and open-minded are convinced of something, it's worth following up on. I think they were right, and I don't know if it'll be in our lifetime, but we will discover that that gateway and that doorway exists.
Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Douglas Grunther. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Douglas Grunther. We're talking about everything tonight. Consciousness, philosophy, physics, the quantum world. All of my favorite subjects. We're doing everything tonight, kicking off a brand new week here on Fade to Black. And Doug, science today, let's go with physics, but tied in with Hollywood, is showing us or trying to teach us about the metaverse, extra dimensions, 11 dimensions, string theory, parallel worlds, of course, the quantum world. And if look at the Marvel movie Quantumania, you know, and getting out there into the public, but this is an aspect of the most woo-woo that used to be called crazy, years ago in science fiction and the world of consciousness, but it is being pushed on us from the world of physics now. And are they trying to show us the door that you're talking about?
Carl Jung came up with the concept of a collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious, he discovered from working with his clients and working in his own dreams, is a reservoir of meaning that we're all born with as humans. And they come out as symbols like the good mother, the good father, the king, the queen, the joker, the thief, the heroes, the Avengers, the comic, Superman, Batman. They're all archetypes of the collective unconscious. And Carl Jung felt that you can repress the unconscious all you want. Here's where he and Freud agreed. They disagreed on a lot. But the unconscious mind will eventually have its say. You can try to repress it all you want. So I think what you're pointing to is the fact, I'm not saying, I don't know how conscious these Hollywood producers and financial backers are at putting out this, but I can tell you this, one of the most successful movie series of all time, Star Wars, was based on the work of Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, and Joseph Campbell's greatest influence was Carl Jung. So this to me these are all expressions that what we're seeing in the 21st century are parts of the collective unconscious that have been repressed for hundreds of years are starting to emerge, because it's time for us to get in touch with them if we're going to thrive in the 21st century. I wanted to mention something because I so enjoy your the visuals and audio of your intros and your breaks. They're really fun. And I'm thinking, here we are, you and I, talking about the fact that both the universe is 95 to 99% dark matter and dark energy, and the human psyche is 95 to 99% influenced by the dark unconscious. And we're talking about this on a show called Fade to Black. It doesn't get much better than that.
No, it doesn't. And I agree with you. My only complaint about Jung, where I think he was completely wrong, he covered the UFO subject, Jung, on UFOs, right? And he said that it was his opinion that UFOs and aliens and ET were the collective consciousness of the public, and that we want this to be real, therefore we make it real, and then we see it, and it is driven by the collective consciousness. And I disagree. I've seen too many strange things in the sky, both during the day and at night, that are physical, and that has nothing to do with my imagination or collective consciousness, or that I manifested this in some way. And that part, I don't think Jung ever saw anything in the sky, but that always rubbed me the wrong way.
Okay, here's my response to that. If Carl Jung came out and said, I know that these things don't exist, these are just part of the collective unconscious, then I would understand you're right. That's not who Carl Jung was an explorer. He would give you his opinion, but he was open-minded. How many psychologists would even, of his stature, would even risk writing about UFOs? And Correct. He wasn't, I'm not saying that we should agree with him, but a great thinker never asks you to agree with him or her. Their job is to stimulate and get us to think more. Marcia McLuhan, one of the key figures of my book, The Quantum and the Dream, famously said, I'm not telling you I'm right. I'm probing. I'm exploring. I'm stretching things out a bit. And for me, Carl Jung was about stretching things out. He wasn't insisting that anybody agree with him. He had his opinions, but he was not didactic like Freud was. And the reason I feel that Jung became much more influential than Freud was brilliant. And he deserves all the accolades for starting this whole process with in the first year of the modern age, publishing the interpretation of dreams. And Freud wasn't wrong about what he said. He was just limited. But Freud could not tolerate criticism. Freud could not tolerate being told he wasn't correct. And that's why he and Jung split. Yeah, I'm not asking anyone to agree with me or Carl Jung or anyone I write about in my book. The purpose of a great thinker is to get us to think more deeply about things, to expand our minds, to open up to more of what's out there. Because at the unconscious level, where all the real creative action is, nothing is certain. Nothing is certain. And if we lived in a universe that was,
yeah, well,
go ahead, please.
I want to stay on the subject because, and I say this often, and I don't say it because I don't know what I'm talking about. I say it because it's true. Boring radio is two people that agree with each other. Mm-hmm. You know what's great radio? Two people that don't agree. And those two people are going to learn something from the other. They're going to have a takeaway, and the audience is going to pick up on that. It's very important. When I have a dinner party at my house, I very, very, very carefully select who is going to be there. I want different opinions. I want a heated argument. I want this to go late into the night. And I want, you know what I mean? I maybe fisticuffs. That's where the magic happens. It's boring to just have everybody just be on the same page. It doesn't work that way. You'll never learn if you're just hanging out with people that you agree with.
Yeah, and someone came up with a really good term for that called the echo chamber. And we see that with TV programs, where where they're coming from, and they never change their minds. Boring. I would add to that the following, something I did learn from philosophy that I find very valuable, and that is 4 levels of communication. So what I would call level 1 is a monologue. Some people are brilliant monologists, and we love listening to them, right? There's a place for it. But it's one person speaking and we're all listening, okay? Then we go to debate. Debates can be fun, exciting. It's like a sporting event. We're rooting for our side. They can be very exciting forms of communication, but you don't learn as much in a debate because most people have picked a side before the debate starts and they're rooting for their side to win rather than trying to learn from the other side. So we have monologue and then debate. What's the next highest level? Conversation. And I once again go to the root meaning of the word conversation. It's from the Latin to move with, not to fight with, to move with. So think about the great conversations that we've had, Jimmy. It's when 2 or more people are actually moving with each other, okay? There's a 4th level, and this comes from philosophy. It's very rare. I've tried to create salons where it happened. It's very difficult, and that's called dialectic. A dialectic is a conversation where the intention is for everybody involved to end up in a place that no one came in with. So, for example, the dream group that I mentioned with Montague Ullman, we all got to a place none of us started with that dream. And so, yes, monologues can be very interesting. Debates can be exciting. Conversations when we move with each other are wonderful. But what we really need is dialectic. That's where our intention is to come out of this to something that I didn't come in with, you didn't come in with, none of your listeners came in with. Somehow we arrived at some deep understanding or truth that none of us came in with. That's a rarity, but that's something worth pursuing.
The echo chamber part of it, and where the conversation, I will do this deliberately, and trust me, I've had a lot of complaints about this. I will, whether I'm agreeing with, I will flip and go, no. And this is why. And that's where a good debater, it doesn't matter what side, what team you're on, right? You can go to side A, you can go to the red team, you can go to the blue team, you can go to the white team, go to the black team, and be able to debate. And as soon as I feel the conversation going stagnant, or where everybody is just mellow, no, I'll flip it. I'll flip it to just get everybody thinking and lift this thing up. You're absolutely right. And hopefully they'll come away with something that where they weren't before. The echo chamber is a bad place to be, man.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes we need, I think what you're describing is a very important action called being the disruptor. Sometimes when things are stagnant, you need someone to light a fire, set off a firecracker verbally, a disruptor. Certainly our culture needs some disruption. I'm not asking for violence. I'm just saying we've got to expand our understanding. In the age of AI, we need to expand what it means to be a human being. What I propose in my book, The Quantum and the Dream, is that the purpose of AI is not just to give us more toys, more comforts. That's part of it, right? I believe that AI is a mirror because it's so intelligent. We created it, right? It's our baby. And it's already surpassing us in many ways of thought. It's challenging us to determine what does it mean to be human in the 21st century. It used to be easy to answer. We're the ones who go out and gather information, facts, and we can analyze them. Other animals can't. And we can come up with theories and ways that the universe works. Well, guess what? Computers are already better than us at that. Computers, anyone who's worked with ChatGPT or Claude or any of the chatbots, anybody who just uses a search engine knows that computers right now, and they're only going to get better, are significantly better than us at accumulating facts, organizing them, and analyzing them. That used to be our job. Instead of freaking out, which most people are, oh my God, AI is going to take all of our jobs and become our rulers, it's freeing us up to go to the part of our brain that computers aren't good at, which is imagination, intuition, empathy for others, new ways of collaborating with each other, which the World Wide Web is giving us, over 5.5 billion brains connected on the digital screen. It's AI is forcing us to rethink what does it mean to be a human being and how do we connect to nature? Because what we've been doing for 500 years is we consider ourselves as apart from nature and taking from nature all that we want to get from it. Well, welcome to climate change and global warming. So we're going to learn, and young people are already we're starting to see this. Younger people want smaller houses. They don't want as much stuff, okay? They want more experiences. And we're going to learn that nature is our mother, that we're not apart from it. We're connected, embedded in it. And I think that if we do it right, and that the jury's out on that, AI is going to force us to become more human in ways that we haven't considered before.
Do you think that the rise of DMT, not psychedelics, that's all recreational stuff and mushrooms and so forth, but with the rise of DMT and the opening up and seeing another parallel world or dimension is suggesting that there is something else out there beyond our physical 3D existence?
Okay, so yeah, now I personally, I'm open to all that stuff. I would legalize all of it. Okay, it's nature's gifts if we use it correctly. Listen, you can abuse. If you drink too much orange juice, you're going to get sick. All right, you got to understand limits, etc. But Aldous Huxley, a brilliant academic, wrote the book The Doors of Perception about how total new worlds opened up by using mescaline. And he was writing about it very intelligently and spiritually. So I don't choose to go that route. I'm not opposed to it. For me, those parallel universes come through dreamwork, deep contemplation, thought experiments, folk tuning into synchronicities. There are many ways to get into the deeper aspects of reality, and I'm not favoring any one over the other, as long as the intention is not selfish and egoistic, but more empathic and wanting to share information with others. As long as that's the intention, whatever gets you there.
Well, in my experience, and by the way, I'm going to be 61 this Thursday. So all of the experimentation that I did was in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I didn't get any deep philosophical insights on myself with all of that experimentation back then. It was it was recreational. That's the way that I look at it. And so today, and I'm just mean in the last 30 years, today, in the last few months, I did try DMT twice, and I could not believe what I was exposed to, because it didn't have an opportunity to get into my bloodstream. All right. There wasn't like a ramp up of a few minutes or a half an hour or a feeling of no, it was bam, instant. I could not believe the switch and the exposure to this parallel world. It's the only way that I can explain it. And my brain, Doug, it was crazy. My brain was trying to assemble this world because it was seeing it for the first time, right? You and I, everybody, since the day that we're born, when we open up our eyes, our brain is calculating what our eyes are seeing, right? And so you are able to go through this world and see the thread on the carpet and the cars that are in front of you, and it's calculating all these trillions of things that are happening every single second, and your brain can keep up with that. Not so fast with DMT. Your brain is seeing something for the first time, so it's got to put it all together and try to figure out what's going on. And it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to experience. That it's a key. It's not a drug. It's not a drug. It's not. It's a key. And I would think that physicists, I mean, ones and zeros, pragmatic, black and white, positive and negative, binary thinkers out there would really benefit from that kind of exposure, even if it was only one time for 5 minutes. That's the other thing. That's the other crazy thing. It's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you're in and out. It's nuts. It's nuts. You could drive home. It's like, what? Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I'm going to share this with you. I want your thought on this. Last year, I went into the king's chamber in Egypt, okay, at night. Later on that night, I'm in the king's chamber by myself. I leave the king's chamber. I go to the airport. I fly back to LA. I get back to my house. I go upstairs in my bedroom. I drop my luggage and I go, I was in the king's chamber this morning. Whoa. Right? Okay. The night that that euphoria, it was just a crazy thing to just process that. Just earlier today, I was standing in the king's chamber. Holy crap. Okay. So the night that I did DMT for the first time, I came home. I walked up into the same bedroom and said the same thing. I went to another world today. Holy crap. It was like that. It was that. And I've never had that with anything else in the past. It was crazy to experience. Crazy. 10 minutes in and out, just like that.
I love hearing experiences like that. There's actually a long tradition of shamanic, healing like that. See, one of my favorite visionaries that I write about in The Quantum and the Dream is Marshall McLuhan, the great 60s media philosopher, who famously said, the medium is the message. And the reason that's such an important statement is what he was saying is the underlying process of any situation has a greater influence on us, unconscious and conscious, than does the content. The process, the content. So what I'm hearing as I listen to you, and I'm not listening so much to the content of what you were saying. I was listening to the excitement in your voice and your body language, which was just ebullient, right? That to me was more powerful than anything you actually said. And that's what was McLuhan's point, that one of the beautiful aspects of the human mind is its ability to detect deep patterns. But we were taught, no, to be successful in life, you have to collect more objects, more stuff. No, the purpose of life is to understand the deep patterns of existence. And what I was just hearing from you and seeing in you was this exhilaration of a breakthrough. And I would say this, I would maintain that your experience was not the special event. Your experience was probably more like reality actually is.
Yeah, confirmation.
What we've been told reality is a very dull version. And when you have an experience like that, or when I had it with, I could talk about it. I had it with just a voice came to me at a very important part of my life. I don't know where it came from. I know it was received by the right hemisphere of my brain. These may be more accurate reflections of reality than what we consider everyday reality. It was exciting to hear you just tell that story, because we could understand that what you want to share, it wasn't a private experience. It's something that you want to share because you just felt it was so exhilarating and so healthy. And we need moments like that. If we had experiences like that all the time, we'd probably be in asylums. Not because it isn't reality, but because we're not ready for that yet.
We're not taught that. We're not taught that. And yet, we listen to the world of science, and today they want us to understand. Belief is that's too religious it's too spiritual of a word to use. So they want us to understand quantum entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
That is a non-local crazy suggestion. And at the same time, an entanglement has finally been measured.
Proven.
Just last week, CERN did a press release. For the first time ever, they've actually measured it. Okay, so that's crazy. But anyway, the idea about that is science fiction. And the idea behind that is what supports quantum computers and a qubit and entanglement in a parallel world, a qubit being entangled, right? Now, that is as science fiction as it gets, but that suggests to everyone that parallel worlds do exist. We just haven't accessed it yet. And that's where that confirmation came in for me, that this reality is very, very tangible.
Well, entanglement is an important theme in my book, The Quantum and the Dream, because I refer to it as the ultimate ride in the quantum amusement park. Okay. All right. What it started as a theory that the implication of quantum theory seemed to point to the fact that two subatomic entities, once they connected and then were separated, quantum entities have spins. You can spin either one way or the other. And the theory said that no matter how far apart these were, if you change the spin of one of them, the other would reverse its spin instantaneously, which of course seemed to contradict the theory of relativity, which says nothing can travel faster than light, right? But this was an implication. And Einstein, the great Einstein, who I admire tremendously, couldn't shift to the right hemisphere of his brain when it came to entanglement because he thought it might disprove relativity. So he spent the rest of his life, 20 years of his life, convinced he could disprove that entanglement existed. He called it spooky action at a distance. The great Einstein. 10 years after Einstein died, John Bell, an Irish physicist, proved mathematically that entanglement was not illogical. It actually was implied by quantum theory. And then in 1982, a French a physicist named Alan Aspect, proved it in a laboratory. And 2 years ago, he received a Nobel Prize belatedly for doing that. So entanglement's been proven. Okay. Now, nobody knows what it's about. It's a big mystery. My interpretation is it's not that the two entities are sending a signal faster than the speed of light. It's that we think they were separated, but nothing is ever separated in the universe. And Fritjof Capra, the physicist who wrote the Tao of Physics, says quantum theory has shown that at the quantum level, the universe is a matrix of interrelationships. There's no such thing as here and there. Everything is connected in a unified matrix. Okay? Now connect that to the Buddha. The Buddha came out of his deep meditation and said, there's no separation among human beings. He wasn't being literal. You're not dressed the same way I am, Jimmy. We're not going to go home and sleep in the same place. He wasn't being literal, but at a deep level, there is the Buddha said, no separation. Quantum theory seems to be implying the same thing. So there again, where's the line between an ancient spiritual insight of the Buddha and what has been proven in quantum theory? Okay. There's, at the very least, there's an affinity between the two. And the more we open up to it and the more we have experiences like you had with the DMT, the more we start to understand what we don't know can fill a whole universe. And that's a very healthy place to be, knowing that we don't know a lot, and anything that we can pick up at this deep level is worth its weight in gold.
Well, if everything, science is nothing but a series of corrections. Well, so is philosophy, if you really want to look at it, right? It's all just a series of corrections.
So it's probably it's probably our lives too, you know?
Yeah, exactly. 100% day by day, right? But here's the thing with that. You have to have very, very thick skin if you're going to be a professional in these areas, because eventually you're going to be proven wrong. Somebody's going to come along, and Einstein's not immune to that. And where we are today with science, it seems that everything that I said this like 3 months ago, the whiteboard scenario, if dark matter and dark energy continue on the path that they are on, and one of the suggestions that I'm throwing out there is that dark energy could be consciousness. If that is the case, we do have to reset. And quite possibly everything that Einstein worked on, most of it, and that we can go back to Newton and the hard mechanical side of physics, it needs to be redone. We are in an era of new physics, and that's moving forward. Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel for humanity? Are we going to be able to evolve?
All right. In my book, the subtitle of my book is Visionary Consciousness, AI, and the New Renaissance. So there's a hint. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I am proposing that there are patterns under the 24/7 news cycle that started in the year 1900 with the discovery of the quantum and Freud's publication of the interpretation of dreams, that is now emerging through 3 shifts in consciousness that are pointing us towards a new renaissance. I think we're going to get there. But before everybody, cracks the champagne and says, well, that's going to be fun, I also point out that the last great Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, was stimulated in large part by the Black Plague, which is on its way to killing a third of Europe, and they didn't know what the cause was. What does a Renaissance mean? It means a rebirth. Well, how can something be reborn either individually in our lives or at a cultural level or on a planetary level? How can something be reborn if what was holding it back doesn't die? And so there's always a lot of darkness and turbulence before you can get to a renaissance, okay? So I think we're going to get there. But I offer in my book a story told to me by a Zen master on my radio program that I think is a perfect guide for us as we do our best, as I know you're doing on your program, to point us towards the new renaissance. And here it is. The Zen master's name was John Dido Laurie. He was a renowned Zen master, and he founded a monastery about 11 miles outside of Woodstock, where I was living at the time and doing radio. And I was very gratified that he agreed to come on my show. Now, I don't know that this actually happened, Jimmy, but when this guy walked into the studio, I felt the air shift, okay? Now, whether that was my imagination or what, I don't know, but this guy was the real deal. And he sat down, and I decided, as long as I have a Zen master here, I might as well not ask a Hallmark card question. Let me go right at it. And so I said, Dido, what is enlightenment? And here's how he answered it. He said, I'll give you the best example I can. He said, about 20 years ago, I had a desire to go on one of those hurricane hunters, those planes that drive through hurricanes to study them. And I got accepted, and I had to go through an orientation because they told me, look, this hurricane hunter plane is specifically built to withstand 150-mile-an-hour winds. It's been through this before, but it's dangerous and it's going to be scary. And then Dido interviewed the pilot, and the pilot said to him, the Zen master, hey, because Dido said, well, did you train specially for this? And the pilot smiled and said, you can't train for this. He said, I don't know what the hurricane's going to do to this plane. They can't predict. He said, I'm a very good pilot. I know how to fly a plane, but I have to use my intuition. I have to really have my wits about me. And I do. So they go up into the hurricane. And Dido, the Zen master, is scared out of his mind because the plane is being battered around and huge lightning bolts are cracking outside the plane. And after about 45 minutes of this turbulence and this fright and this lightning, the plane breaks through the eye of the hurricane. And the eye of the hurricane is pure light and quiet. And he said, that's enlightenment. So what's the metaphor here? To get to enlightenment, you have to go through a lot of turbulence. And that's what I think is going on now with climate change, and the AI ramping up is getting our brains to go faster than maybe we're comfortable with. We're going to have to adapt to it. A renaissance is a beautiful thing, but it only comes if we're capable of getting through a lot of turbulence. And that's why I found Dido's answer and story to be really helpful. And it's one I keep reminding myself when I feel the turbulence in my own life is getting a little scary.
Well, yeah, for sure. You got to go in the dark. You got to go out and find the edge of the cliff, stick your foot out, right? And find the edge of the cliff. You have to do that sometimes. As scary as it is, there's no way to value or have, be able to judge what is good if you don't have that bad to compare it to. That's it. There isn't another way to look at it. But here's the deal with Dido. You still have to fly back into the hurricane. That's the other part.
Yeah. But he did it, but his mind had shifted, and he was a lot more comfortable with the turbulence when they came back into it, because he had experience going through it, and he had experienced the light that one can get to. It's interesting you brought up Nietzsche before. My favorite line from Nietzsche, I think, is from also Sprach Zarathustra. When you stare into the abyss stares back at you. That's a good definition of the unconscious.
It's so true. It's so true. Back to the dream thing and unconscious. What's your theory on why time doesn't seem to apply in a dream, where we can dream a dream, which seems in real time, that is days long, and you wake up and 6 hours went by or 4 hours. It's like, wait a minute. No, I just dreamt a whole week's worth of events. And then you wake up and only 6 hours go by. What's going on there? What's that an example of?
Terrific question. I'm going to apply it back, since we're having a conversation, right? Trying to get to a dialectic to move with each other. Go back to your DMT experience, right?
Sure.
When you were and I know it's very quick, right? It doesn't last long. But when you were in that experience, was there a past, a present, and a future?
Not sure. Not sure. I'll say this, and then you can continue. The first time, it was about 7 minutes. I had a timer going, right? It was 7 minutes. It seemed, I mean, when I popped open my eyes, and it was so complex, and it was just an amazing experience. It wasn't scary at all. It wasn't. Anyway, when I looked down and saw that it was only 7 minutes, I was like, that's impossible. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know how to quantify that, and I tried to. The second time I did it was almost 30 minutes. Okay, I don't want to get into the details, but I had a timer going, so that was almost 30 minutes, and it was complex, man. Yeah, I could compare it to the dream state, where time and space just kind of coexisted, is the only way I can explain it.
So, the reason my book is called The Quantum and the Dream is because there's so much evidence of the affinity between what goes on in the dream world, which we can experience, and the quantum world. Because at the quantum level existence, now remember, when I state anything science in my book, I'm not a scientist. I quote a legitimate scientist and I give the footnote, okay? At the quantum level of existence, there is no past, no present, no future. I should say there's no past or future. Everything is present, okay? There's no distinction among those three terms. In the dream world, there's no distinction either, as you pointed out. So there is an affinity between what goes on at the quantum level of existence and at the dream level of existence. And some very bright people were convinced, and I believe they were right, that that's because the distinction between the unconscious mind, which is where we dream, and the quantum level of existence, which is the core of the universe, they may be connected in some very intriguing ways. We don't know that, but it seems to be implied. And at the very least, when one tunes into one's dreams or one contemplates the implications of quantum theory, not because we're trying to be right or prove something, but because we're opening up to it, the value is it gets us off our high horse that we can figure out everything through logic and formula, and that the world is simply a series of objects that we can break apart and take and use as we see fit. That game ain't working anymore. And if I remember correctly, Jimmy, during your promotion, you call it a game changer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, we're living in an age that's going to be a game changer. And the game that's changing is the left hemisphere rational certainty about how reality works. And AI, if we use it correctly, is going to help us get there. In my book, I have a formula, and it's NI, and then a parentheses, HI over AI, close parentheses, equals New Renaissance. NI stands for nature's intelligence, and it's in a larger font than the other two. Then there's human intelligence over artificial intelligence or computer intelligence. My point being, I believe we have a good chance of collaborating the best of human knowledge and wisdom with computers' intelligence, collaborate those two so that we can learn more about nature's intelligence, which is the mother of both. And if we do that, we can get to the New Renaissance, because for the first time in evolution, which I know is a big topic on your show, for the first time in evolution on planet Earth, we have three powerful forms of intelligence interacting: human intelligence, computer intelligence, and the most powerful of all, nature's intelligence. And one of the things that was most exciting when I wrote my book, The Quantum and the Dream, is I didn't know how it was going to end. And it turned out that a lot of the end was because I discovered a woman biologist named Lynn Margulis. Her nickname was the Angry Earth Mother because she didn't take crap from anybody, and she was as smart as anybody. And she was able to prove through scientific examination her intuition, which is that ancient microbes figured out through a process of feedback that how to collaborate at a level greater than compete, and that evolution is a pull towards more complex, novel forms of collaboration. Competition has its place. We can learn through competition, but ultimately evolution is asking of us to collaborate. And now we have another form of intelligence to collaborate with, AI. Hey, the whole thing could go off. AI could take over. It could get out of control. But I am convinced that there are enough people with good intentions working on this that we're going to figure out how to interact these three forms of intelligence, because evolution gave us one hand on the steering wheel of evolution. And we're either going to steer it off a cliff or we're going to steer it towards a new renaissance. And there's no guarantees, but I'm betting on the new renaissance.
Here's my take. And I like that, by the way. I like that. But no, I disagree. Let's get back to the let's get back.
Good.
In this. This is my take. I'm not sure how much further computing or technology is going to move forward. And I say it like this: E.T. lands. This is the Pandora's box that I have. E.T. lands, comes down and goes, well, you know what? Okay, check it out. Math is not the way. We gave that up 1,000,000 years ago. It's going to be something else, something more spiritual, something more conscious driven, and that's what they are going to throw on the table. And they are going to say, if you want to evolve, this is where you need to go. You need to leave those ones and zeros and the hardware to the side. It's not about math. That's what I think. That's my take.
I agree with you 100%. My formula does not disagree with that. And to show you how much I agree with what you just said, one of my goals in writing this book, The Quantum and the Dream, was to finally give my take on something I saw 55 years ago for the first time, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I was ready. I wanted to give my take on the final sequence.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay. I think it comports with what you just said. Here's my take. I'm giving away part of the end of my book, but that's okay. So the usual take on the end is Hal had to be his brain had to be unplugged because he had turned into a murderer. Okay, true.
Right.
I see a more powerful metaphor. Okay, how does that move? What is the last sequence? The astronaut, the human, is pulled through the Stargate by the monolith, which is what the whole purpose of it sending a signal from the moon to Jupiter was, right? In other words, the monolith was seeking, was, if the human could prove that it could get to the orbit of Jupiter, right? If humans could prove they could get there, they could then get the human could get transformed. Okay, how did the human get to the orbit of Jupiter? He depended on Hal. That spaceship doesn't get there without the super technical brain of Hal. But Hal was useless going through the Stargate. It took a human to get transformed into the Star Child. So my take on it is the unplugging of Hal's brain is a metaphor for what you just said, that human beings are going to finally have to unplug that rational, technical side of their brain if they're going to be capable of a true transformation without freaking out, without going insane. As sophisticated as Hal's brain was, it had no capacity to go through that Stargate and go through what the astronaut Bowman did. But without Hal, Bowman doesn't get there. So I'm saying computers are not the end game. They're going to help us get to a place where then it's up to us humans to discover the end game. So I think we're kind of in sync there.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, and it's my favorite movie. I've vocalized that enough on this show over the years. It's my favorite movie, and I try to watch it at least once a month. I almost watched it last night, oddly enough. Talk about synchronicity, right?
Yeah.
But I like the way that Kubrick, well, first off, they wrote the movie as they went along. The book came out after the movie was released. And Kubrick talked about this a lot. He always struggled with the ending, and so did Arthur C. Clarke. And then they kind of took the chicken road, right? Let's leave the ending up to the individual. Whatever you get from it, okay, all right. But I like the way that they did that. And just suggesting that, because so many people came away from that movie when it had its first run going, well, okay, didn't really get the ending. Beautiful movie to watch, though, right? So anyway, my take was, and it really hasn't changed over the years much, but it's evolved into that there is an intelligence behind all that there is, that it's not humans, Earth, or the rest of the universe is not by chance, that there is an intelligence and a spirituality that is driving us. And I think that's what I always got from the Star Child when it was shown on the screen, that it's this way everywhere. And it's not some localized thing on Earth. That's what that was always my take, that there is a deep spiritual background to this.
Yeah, I think a great movie, a great book, a great talk gets us into the fabric of the universe. And I agree with you. I think the movie, whether Kubrick and Clarke intended it or not, great art is the artist doesn't always know everything that it means. I think they were getting to what the fabric of the universe is, which is it's about transformation, and it's about, what is a child? A child's mind is totally open. Okay, so to be reborn is a metaphor for a renaissance. That's what Renaissance means, to be reborn.
Right. Kubrick did that in almost every movie, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Who are we? Where are we going? And how messed up are we, right? And how do we get back on track? If you look at any one of his movies, it doesn't matter. Full Metal Jacket, right? It doesn't matter. You can go anywhere. Dr. Strangelove. You know, think about that. Anyway, I could just The Shining, right?
Clockwork Orange,
Clockwork Orange.
Barry Lyndon.
You know what? Barry Lyndon, best example of that, actually. That's such a good movie, man. Every time I watch it, and I think that I'm just going to say this in a very direct way. Stanley made sure that he didn't fail in artistic license, in the cinematography, in the audio, in the editing, that the production was always going to envelop the viewer, and then the message will come later, right? But you wouldn't walk out of the theater because it was bad editing or a bad soundtrack or a bad screenplay.
He also was a trickster because he knew he had to fool the backers, the financial backers, and the movie company was giving him the money. He realized if they realized what he was experimenting with, they'd pull the plug on him. So he was able to do his work by misdirection and subterfuge because he knew they wouldn't tolerate what he was doing. But I think the word that comes to mind, Jimmy, of all that we're talking about is transcendence. Transcendence.
For sure.
Whether it was your DMT experience, whether it was my dreamwork experience, I in my book I talk about some synchronicities that changed history. I mentioned a nightmare, Elias Howe's nightmare changed history. We're talking about transcendence, the ability to move through the limited ways we've been taught to look and feel about the world and get into the core of our own unconscious, which is dark, mysterious, ambiguous, but it's where all the creative action is. And that's why I love celebrating the visionary thinkers that are the heartbeat of my book, which include Carl Jung, which include Marshall McLuhan, who taught us about. He anticipated how the digital screen was going to rewire the human brain, and how we could best take advantage of it. Joseph Campbell, we mentioned, the great mythologist whom George Lucas was inspired by, and others. Lynn Margulis, who should be better known. William Irwin Thompson should be better known. These people were transcendent in their thinking. They could see through the limitations. That's where the excitement is. And we're going to need it more than ever because anxiety levels are elevating around the world. And those of us who can take heart, who can embrace the John Dido Laurie example of being able to tolerate the turbulence and experience the light and quiet of the center. To get to the center of our psyche is no different than going in that hurricane hunter through the turbulence. It's worth it. It's worth it.
For sure. I think every day we should live a Thomas Campbell day, right? The hero's journey. You wake up in the morning.
Campbell,
yeah, Joseph Campbell. I said Thomas Campbell. He was also great, Thomas. Joseph Campbell, where you wake up in the morning, right? You plot out your day, you go off, you conquer something, you become the hero, and you come home at night. Just the hero's journey, right? You leave home, you come back home, the hero, and that's what you should do.
Well, here's why you put your finger on something, because if you look at what Joseph Campbell described as the hero's journey, which is basically an analysis of all the great mythical stories.
Everything, anything that captured your attention for millennia, follow that path. Yeah, for sure.
But guess what? One of the essential parts of that hero's journey is required if you want to make it back home is the descent downward, which is about, I would say, going into the deeper levels of the psyche. Odysseus, on the hero's journey, had to go down into Hades and have a conversation with his dead comrades who died in the Trojan War before he could make it back home again. That's about becoming more aware of the deeper level of who we are. The hero's journey is not just about sword fights, and beating the other. It's about becoming more aware of who we actually are, individually and as a species. There's no more exciting or important journey that we could be taking, and that's what inspired me to write my book.
Yeah, you've got to go out, man. You have to take a peek. You got to get your foot out on the edge of the cliff, man. In the dark. That's what you have to do. Douglas.
There's no compass that can tell you exactly what direction you're in.
Perfect conversation tonight, my friend. Where can everybody now? I've got DouglasGrunther.com up. Where can everybody go and buy the book? Just go to the website.
The book is The Quantum and the Dream. Subtitle is Visionary Consciousness, AI, and the New Renaissance. It's available on Amazon. It can be ordered at any bookstore. My website, DouglasGrunther.com, is basically right now about the book. And I'm very heartened by the fact that not only got positive reviews, but it was very important to me, Jimmy, and I know this goes to your issue with philosophy, which I agree with you on. I was not going to be satisfied unless I could write a book that's complex, that was enjoyable and exciting to read. I didn't want this to be some abstract intellectual exercise. I was not interested in pleasing some academic folks. I wanted this to be an exciting journey and trip. And so I'm gratified that that's what a number of reviewers have said. So it's The Quantum and the Dream, and I can't thank you enough. I enjoyed this conversation. I love the work you're doing with Fade to Black, and you're a game changer, and we need more of them.
Thank you so much, Douglas. So you're saying that your book, you were not Gurdjieff. Now you can laugh.
Now I can laugh.
You have a good night, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Douglas Grunther. Again, DouglasGrunther.com is right there for everybody. And with that, what have I got going on? I say this at the end of every show. Tomorrow night. Hans Dietrich is on with us tomorrow night. We're going to go into deep history and all of his research around the world. That's right. The mystery of symbols, all of that tomorrow night. Until then, all I've got is Go Backley Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Backley Tappy.